Welcome.
Welcome. I am Angus,
And I'm Malcolm.
and today we are going to be talking about.
Venom.
Venom. We are going to be talking about Venom. We just came out of the theater just a little while ago. Saw it right tonight, and it was
It was stellar.
It was stellar. That's the word we keep using, and it is absolutely true. So,
Oh, and spoiler warning: we're gonna talk like start to finish. This is gonna be like kind of a bit of a thorough like investigation, sort of us watching the film. So if you haven't seen Venom yet, go see it. Amazing movie. But spoiler warning: we're gonna talk Venom.
yeah. So, while we were watching the movie, I took some notes in the dark theater. So, they're on a tiny notepad and are written really largely so I could actually, see them. So, we are going to talk from start to finish pretty much everything we liked about the film. And I'm very thorough about it. I have a lot of things that I liked and a lot of things that I have right here. So, let's just get straight into it.
Let's do it.
So, original thoughts for what you thought the movie would be like.
Okay, so Angus and I are walking in the theater, right? And we're walking, and we look at each other, and we're talking constantly, Venom, Venom. And then we just look at each other, and we're like, you know what? We're walking into this at a 7.5. With the trailers and stuff, we assume the movie is going to be a 7.5, and we will tell you how it turned out to be at the very end when we walked out of the theater.
Yeah, I was thinking kind of 7 out of 10. And I was thinking it might go a little lower considering what I was seeing from critics, Rotten Tomatoes kind of thing, and we might be able to get into that later, but we'll see, talking about that. So, let's just go from the movie itself. So, what do you think of the opening and establishing shot of the movie?
I love the opening shot. Because
What is the opening shot?
Okay, the opening shot is like right after it goes through the two title sequences of Columbia and Sony and one other
Marvel.
In
association with Marvel.
It shoots to this like galaxy, just the stars from the sky, and then it has the Columbia pictures in there, and it looks just amazing. Like it's just the stars, and it gives me a lot of Stranger Things vibes.
Ooh, you were saying it reminded you of Spider-Man 3. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 3, because
when they're laying in the web, Mary Jane and
the
Peter
opening
Parker.
shot is a shot of the stars, and then it pans down to them.
And then it gives me chills with the whole Venom thing and the Venom crawling across the grass going to Peter Parker. It wasn't even at the opening. I think that was close to like the third act of the movie. The Venom, I thought it was super cool. And then it moves to J. Jonah Jameson's son. Going, and it doesn't even show them retrieving the symbiote. It only shows their travel on the way back.
And I thought that was a good idea. It wasn't a necessary inclusion to include their mission to space. They didn't need it. It's very similar to Infinity War with the destruction of Xandar.
Exactly.
That wasn't absolute. Oh, also spoilers for Infinity. Basically, any spoilers for Marvel stuff. So
just keep up to date.
So any Sony Marvel movies, any Marvel Cinematic Universe. So in Infinity War, obviously, it was implied that pretty much all of Xandar was destroyed by Thanos in order for him to receive the Power Stone.
Yeah. He just had it.
Yeah,
basically.
he just had it. But he didn't. They didn't show the destruction of Xandar because they didn't have to. Even the Russo brothers mentioned, we didn't include it because it wasn't necessary, and also time constraints. And I think that's the same for Venom, because the length was pretty good.
And that's we're gonna talk about that more. But the length of Venom was like almost perfect, but then your brain keeps telling you I don't know, something needs to change here. So let's move on. Opening shot, wonderful. It opens up to the spaceship retrieving 4 symbiotes, I think. A blue symbiote, Riot, Venom, and a girl symbiote.
A yellow symbiote.
Yellow symbiote, yeah. And that's a girl. Girl. They can have a host of any gender, but it's generally known that the yellow symbiote attaches to a girl.
If I understand correctly, that would be Scream.
Yes, I'm pretty sure it's Scream.
Going off that, this movie is loosely based, from what we can tell, is loosely based on the Lethal Protector run of the Venom comics.
I
So
need to read that.
it's called Venom Lethal Protector, and it's essentially, it's very important in Venom's run because it's a point where Venom's really he's really kind of an anti-hero, and that's also what happens with this film. But also what makes it so similar is, like we mentioned, Scream. Our understanding that it's Scream because of what is in Lethal Protector, which are what are called the 5 founding symbiotes, which are Scream, Phage, Riot, Lasher, and Agony.
And we see Riot, we see Scream,
We see Venom, but he's not
a 5
he's another
founding.
symbiote. And one other blue symbiote.
Yeah.
Blue-ish. It's blue and black. We're not entirely sure what that could be. Like, I couldn't tell you, but I would say I'm fairly certain that the yellow one is Scream. It's yellow with like black dots, and if you see that character, it's clearly yellow with black dots. So that's what you would assume. Although we will get into talking about what happened with the other symbiotes in a bit. Because as you know, if you've seen Venom, Riot is the villain. So now back to the opening scene with the spaceship. Something that I immediately noticed, and I know you did, was the score. Really eerie, and it was obviously, and Venom did this very well. It was very dramatic.
It was a lot of sharp violin and that kind of thing. It was pretty cool. I liked it.
Yep. Something that I found was really good was the CGI in the beginning of the spaceship. It was good. The spaceship comes, it lands.
It does not land. It crashes.
Okay,
it crashes.
Landing
and
is
burns
way too
really,
generous.
really
It crashes and burns, and it's very just a dramatic explosion. This movie does drama very well, and
then we're introduced to this movie's villain. Basically, as we said, it's Riot, but it's Carlton Drake. I think I'm saying that right. Right?
Carlton Drake.
Drake, and he's the owner, sort of
the founder of the
Life Foundation. And we see him. He's kind of spectating from the back, and people are videoing the scene because it's the Life Foundation that's going out to find these symbiotes.
I think what it seems like is it's body cams.
Yeah, it's like body cams on the agents and sort of things that are checking out the crash site basically of this thing, and they're moving around it, and basically Carlton Drake and a bunch of other spectators back at the Life Foundation are just watching it move through.
And then they find out that an astronaut survived.
And
this astronaut is assumed to be...
not assumed to be, it is. They say his name.
They call him James, I think, in the movie, if I remember correctly.
Maybe.
And in the comics, obviously, like J. Jonah Jameson can't seem to stop mentioning in the Sam Raimi trilogy, his son is an astronaut, and his name is John Jameson. But his name's John, but I couldn't tell you if it actually is his son, but
definitely, and
for the
it's
sake of
so
this, let's assume it is.
Too. Like it's such an accurate depiction of Venom, and that's what I love so much about it, is that Venom came from space, he's an alien, and it was J. Jonah Jameson's son's trip, and we see that in, if anybody has seen it, I doubt it, the Spider-Man Unlimited. Angus and I watched Spider-Man Unlimited as children, and we saw the episode where Venom first appeared with like the red and blue shine on him that looks super cool, and the origin is just, it's so spot on, and it's not even like kind of straying away. It's pretty direct, and that's what I love. So that's basically the whole opening scene before it boom flash to New York.
Ooh, but wait, one more thing about the opening scene. The astronaut that's still alive, he has a symbiote in him. This symbiote is, and I don't think we have to keep mentioning spoilers. It is spoilers. It is Riot.
It is
and
Riot.
We know for certain it is Riot. So he, the astronaut is kind of thrashing. Well, not thrashing, but he's like kind of pulsing, and then he goes into a ambulance.
Yeah.
And he's being driven away until, like a horror movie.
Oh, it's like this is the most horrific part.
It wraps around somebody's head and like pulls it back, and then like breaks limbs. It flips the entire vehicle.
And that's one thing I wanted to talk about, is that the symbiote acts a lot like human body parts. So you see the symbiote wrapping around people and stuff like that, more like arms than an actual
like
tentacle.
A snake wrapping around a person and squeezing it.
I don't know. I kind of thought of it more like WWE. It sounds weird, but it seemed like a lot of the scenes that they tried to establish was like the symbiote comes out of the body, wraps around somebody's head like a wrestler would and like slams them down. I thought that was it was kind of symbolic.
Because
it was really good CGI.
Because yeah, at points with Eddie Brock, the symbiote doesn't come out fully, but it's only his arm which is covered with the symbiote, which makes it either extra strong or like move in a different way. But yeah, so the symbiote it flips the ambulance. It kills pretty much everybody inside except for the driver, where the symbiote goes and attaches to a new host, the driver, because the driver is obviously more alive than the other one.
Exactly. I don't know if this is super accurate, but I swear that the person that the symbiote takes over is the Asian woman from Terminator 2. And
the parallels are too strong there.
It seems like a really strong parallel because in Terminator 2, the actual thing, the T whatever, is a liquid form, and it can take over certain bodies. So it takes over this woman, and she...
No, it becomes the body.
Yeah. It shapeshifts to look like the body, and it like basically puts out metal spikes and stuff, and it's super close, but I feel like it's too bit of a too accurate. But then, boom, flash to New York, amazing establishing shot.
The title card was, the title, it just looks fabulous.
It looks amazing. It's straight from the Venom comic book cover with cool static. I love it.
Yep. But a small gripe here. I feel like the title was a bit too early, but that's totally fine. So something I immediately noticed when we went into the opening scene with Tom Hardy and Felicia Hardy. Wait, no, not Felicia Hardy. I'm blanking on her name, but Anne in the movie. Her name is Anne. Yeah. And his name's Eddie, obviously. Something I noticed immediately, chemistry is absolutely amazing between these actors.
And it's not like really sappy. It's like the perfect amount where you're not
It seems like a real relationship.
Exactly. It doesn't seem like a movie relationship. It seems pretty genuine, and I like the actor for Eddie Brock's love interest, or Anne, mainly because she was in a very popular movie, The Greatest Showman, that came out last year, and she plays the woman in that movie, and she does it pretty well. She does the whole I'm upset with you really, really good at the end, as we can tell when Eddie Brock kind of sort of lies to her.
Michelle Williams. I just searched it up. It's Michelle Williams.
That's her name. All right.
Also, not only chemistry, what I immediately noticed, this movie is really good at comedy. Like it is genuinely
so
funny.
Good. It's not Thor Ragnarok comedy. It's like the perfect amount where it's like, this is kind of spooky, don't bring your kids, but then it's like, this is some kooky jokes.
I genuinely laughed out loud in quite a few scenes.
Yeah, me too. Okay, so speeding it up.
Oh, then we move into, and I'm sure this is what you're about to say.
Yeah.
Eddie Brock is a TV show. The Brock Show.
Eddie Brock has a TV show as a reporter. Eddie Brock is not...
The Brock Report.
Eddie Brock is not a photographer for the Daily Bugle in this movie yet, at least. Eddie Brock is a reporter for his own show, basically. And we're going to move past a lot of this because we got to speed up. But what Eddie Brock basically does is Eddie Brock is part of his own show, and he already disagrees with the stuff that... He already knows something is up with the Life Foundation and that something is going on with Carlton Drake, and that he's lying.
Yeah, and Carlton Drake, when Eddie Brock is introduced to Carlton Drake, who's played by Riz Ahmed, who does an excellent job.
He does a great villain. I love it.
What I immediately noticed, Carlton Drake is really charming. Like, he seems like a nice guy and stuff, and then that's what happens later in the movie. He's doing terrible things, which you kind of know in the beginning, but you see evidence of it. He continues to be charming, but takes a dark turn and says some things that without context seem kind of okay, but are actually like terrible things. So now I'm going to do a little segue into kind of what this movie is about. So in my opinion, the plot of this movie, or at least what this movie aims to struggle with as its goal, is talking about life.
Oh,
and
I love that.
Not whether or not you are alive, but when somebody says like get a life, but like having a life, but specifically a good one. So what happens is when Eddie Brock confronts Carlton Drake, he says some crazy things, and he says a few things that he he says some names of people that Carlton Drake has been responsible for death for, and he only found them because he was snooping through his wife's computer.
Because she works for a law firm
That
or
works
something
for the Life Foundation.
that works for the Life Foundation, and that's what evidently comes to their relationship's demise is that Eddie was snooping, and then she made her lose her job.
He went behind her back.
He went behind her back and stole this information, and it was just not okay. Don't don't do that.
And then so back to the thing about life, when Eddie Brock he talks about those things, and then he's taken out by security, and Carlton Drake says to him, "Have a nice life." And what's said to him by his employer, which I couldn't tell you the actor's name, but he was in Luke Cage, and he's a pretty damn good actor. But what happened was he also said, "Have a nice life," because he had to fire Eddie Brock because that was such a terrible move for him and his show. And then later in the movie, when Venom inevitably wins, he says to Carlton Drake, "Have a nice life." And this is obviously huge irony because they say, "Have a nice life," and then after they both say that to him, Eddie Brock's life absolutely falls apart. He loses his love, he loses his job, he says he loses his apartment, and he pretty much loses his sanity and just everything that makes him happy. He is a really unhappy guy. So the goal of this movie is pretty much Eddie Brock losing everything and having a terrible life, and him getting that train back onto the rails.
Exactly. And that's just this movie. I was not sold on it for the first 2/3 of it.
Really?
Until
Oh wait, I know what you're gonna mention. Let's mention that when we get to it.
We'll talk about it later. So right now, where are we at? We're talking about Carlton Drake. We're talking about how he's charming. They were doing this field trip scene, and I thought it was super cool. It was with Carlton Drake and a bunch of kids, and he's talking about their space exploration, and then he's like, maybe someday
we're getting
you
a
guys
real.
could be
It's easy.
astronauts.
It's easy to when you see Carlton Drake and you hear his story and what kind of character he is. I'm getting a real evil Elon Musk vibe.
Oh, and from the outside, Carlton Drake, you look at him and you're from the outside, not paying
Riz Ahmed
attention.
is a pretty good looking guy.
Oh, well, that's not what I mean. I mean, from the outside, from the very basics, you look at him and you're like, that guy is a charming dude who's just looking for the good, right? Just searching for what will help society. And I thought that was pretty cool. Okay, so...
And then the big shift.
Okay, so, moving on from Carlton Drake. And onto Venom yet, or no?
We're not at that part in the movie. There's a lot before... There's not a lot of Venom.
I love that. I love how there's a lot before Venom appears.
This movie, what I can tell you, if you haven't seen it, or if you have seen it, just something I want to bring up about it, the establishing shots are
amazing.
So good.
They're not just drone shots, they're they have purpose, and that's what I love about a good establishing shot, is that it has a purpose, and you learn stuff in the establishing shot, and there's what I like.
They're
in this
beautiful.
Movie, yeah, they are, and there's little to no text in the bottom left, sort of this is where you are. It's more just you should know where we are.
Yep, the movie doesn't explain to you things that don't need to be explained. Also, with the the stuff about life, just again, obviously, the Life Foundation. That's a big thing. Which is something that's in the comics, obviously. This, as most comic book movies, a lot of the characters are from the comics. A lot of the companies are from the comics. So then we go into Carlton Drake, and he's doing... Because he's the one who got the symbiotes, because originally the launch was from the Life Foundation. The Life Foundation launched a rocket to find more life, but specifically different resources that could cure cancer or whatever. So, or anything like that. Then they land on a comet, and this is what's said in the movie. This obviously isn't seen in a scene. They land on a comet, and they get what they see. Apparently, they realize that there are thousands of organisms there, but they specifically pick up 4 different symbiotes, which are Riot, Scream, Venom, and one that we don't know yet.
And that's super cool. I gotta admit, I kind of liked how there was just more than one. It wasn't just straight Venom and straight Spider-Man. It was like, this is Venom and like other versions of Venom, basically, which was something we've never seen before, which is exactly what we needed in this movie.
So, with his first test, because this is what I was saying before, his first test is with Venom bonding to a host. But before that, even, they had Scream, or a yellow symbiote, bonding to a rabbit, which works. So, Carlton Drake, foolishly, or rather very rushingly, says, move right on to human trials.
Let's just go straight to it, basically.
It's immediately, that's when you realize that is not okay. That is not the mind of a scientist. That is a mind of, like, an anarchist.
Exactly.
So, what happens is, the first test, the first human test, the name of the person is Isaac. And he mentions to that person, while they're in the cell and they're getting ready to unleash the symbiote upon the person, he says, did you know that's a biblical name? And he's saying that in the story of Isaac, which is where Abraham has to sacrifice his son Isaac, in that story, Isaac is making the real sacrifice because he's the one whose life is going away.
Exactly.
So he's kind of, I guess, making the person feel better about it. But what happens is he starts mentioning, look at the world around you. Hasn't God kind of failed us? Like, God is obviously, he's given up on us. He's not here to help. He's gone. So, obviously, with his connection with Isaac, because clearly he has a connection to him because he's going to change Isaac's life forever.
Basically, yeah.
Which is ending it. That's how he's going to change his life.
Exactly.
It seems like he sees himself as a new god.
And that's what really...
He has a terrible god complex.
That gives me shivers. That makes me almost angry, is that Carlton Drake thinks of himself as the good. And talking about...
But that's how you make a good villain.
You make a good villain by thinking they're doing good. The best villains are the villains who think that their cause is the greatest cause. That's why in Infinity War, Thanos... You can paint Thanos as the protagonist of the film. And that's why Ultron makes such a good villain as well. Nobody really talks about Avengers 2. Nobody really talks about how it's bad or anything. It's a pretty good movie. But Ultron, his goal is good in his eyes, which makes him a great villain. Moving on from that, we're talking about Carlton Drake, and
let's talk about because of the test, we're already on that. Let's talk about what the symbiote looks like. Specifically, the CGI and the movement of the symbiote.
It's just... It gives me nostalgic vibes from Spider-Man 3 and Venom in that movie. Is the move... They took a lot from the Sam Raimi. The movement of it, it's... Okay, I'm going to explain this really quick. It's like if you merged a snake with its slithering, you merged a spider with its legs, and you merged just slime in general. So it crawls along the floor, but it also slides across the floor, and it just looks... and walls and stuff, and it just looks, and you feel this thing, and you're like, this is really cool. It's like bubbly, but then it's also like sharp.
The CGI is so perfect that it feels like while it may be different for some people, you can get an idea of what the symbiote would feel like on your fingers.
Yeah, and that's the thing.
That's when you know there's good CGI.
It's good CGI, but it weirds me.
Oh yeah.
So then it attaches to Isaac. It almost.
Mm-hmm. He's screaming in pain, and it's all in his body, and then on his chest and near his stomach, it starts making like boils, and speaking of boils, it looks like it's boiling inside him,
and it's just kind of pushing.
What happens is, from Carlton Drake's view, which is an interesting way to put it, because now that the symbiote's attached, it's like he's not human anymore, so obviously from a camera perspective, they always seem to focus on the human's perspective.
Yeah, exactly.
So then we move on to who are still real humans. They look in on him, and what happens is you hear a bunch of crunching, breaking, and squeezing. And what the symbiote essentially does is it clearly breaks all the bones in the body and absorbs all of the organs.
And it eats all of the organs, and that's what I love, is that if it can't actually match with the body, it decides to feast upon it because that's what it needs to survive.
To put it most simply, it literally takes the life away from the body.
Everything that gives the body life is just taken away because the symbiote needs it, and because it's not a suitable host. And suitable host is like, it's not just an opinion thing. Suitable host is like, that's something you need. It's not just like it's something the symbiote prefers. It's something the symbiote needs.
Speaking of suitable host, this moves us on to a bit about Carlton Drake. That symbiote, which I think we can assume it's not Venom, but it's the blue symbiote. Isn't
it Riot?
Probably the blue one.
No, it's the blue.
Riot,
it is the
Riot
blue
was
one.
connected to the EMS driver.
It was, yeah. So you're right. It's the blue one.
The blue one, what happens is after it kills the person, it goes out of the person.
It does.
And it leaps onto the wall. And it specifically, because Carlton Drake is close to the glass, it goes towards Carlton Drake. This is a massive amount of foreshadowing that shows that Carlton Drake is a suitable and apparently excellent, pretty much perfect host for any symbiote, because this symbiote not only wants to be attached to him, but later in the movie, Riot goes specifically for Carlton Drake out of pretty much thousands of people
the
possibly
complete opposite side of the earth. Basically,
what you could expect to
flies,
be the opposite of the earth.
Like, we're talking about the EMS driver, right? I'm just gonna go straight into it. The EMS driver like flies, or it merges with like an old lady, and then it merges with a little girl, and the little girl goes with her family and flies basically to San Francisco, right? And this little girl finds her way into the lab, probably by using a bit of the symbiotes pushing and like grabbing heads, sort of power.
That's amazing.
Exactly, moving in, and then merges with Carlton Drake. And it's just, you don't see the actual merge, but you're like, that's insane how that symbiote went across the earth to find the perfect host. So moving on from that, are we at Venom yet? Are we at
Almost?
We're almost there? Okay, because I'm excited to talk about that.
A little bit about the first trailer. One of the doctors in the trailer, this is specifically the most important doctor. I can't remember her last name, which would be more important, but her first name is Dora. What's her last name? It's like Blake or something like that?
Oh, that sounds right, but I can't tell you.
But that doctor, in the trailer she said symbiote, which is, by definition, the definition of symbiote is not incorrect. It is another way to properly pronounce it in an American translation. But in this movie, that doctor pronounces it symbiote.
And I like that.
They changed that, and while they could have left it there, I think it could have bugged some people, and that's okay. So now we move on to how the symbiote hates sound. So I'm not sure the first instance of this happening, but what happens is in this movie, and this is a big difference between Spider-Man 3 and this movie, they really focus on Venom's weaknesses, but specifically one weakness, and that is sound. Because as you may know, the two weaknesses of Venom are sound and fire. Fire has a big focus at the end of the movie, but sound is focused on throughout.
Oh yeah.
There are probably close to, I said before, about 7 instances of sound affecting
about
the symbiote.
Sound and fire as well, like just the weaknesses.
What happens is the symbiote is just in serious pain.
It wants to leave. It's in so much pain. It's willing to leave its host to get away from it, basically, and that's a huge symbolic thing. All right.
So now we're moving on. We're going back to Tom Hardy, Eddie Brock, and he, with the doctor that we were talking about, or scientist per se, break into the Life Foundation.
Okay, and here's the thing. So Eddie Brock has this, since he's a reporter, he has a lot of friends around town, and he has this friend who's a homeless woman, and basically what they're doing the trials on is poor homeless people who just want something more, whatever Carlton Drake gave them as an excuse.
What the scientist says is homeless people are signing waivers that they don't understand.
Exactly. So he moves into the Life Foundation, and he basically breaks in with Nora's help. Nora, right?
Dora.
I think it's Nora.
Okay.
Either way, Angus is going to check. But he breaks into the Life Foundation, and he sees his friend, and I can't remember her name. Mariah. And she's in there, and he tries to get her out. Because they're good friends, so he grabs the closest thing, because he touches buttons. And this is the first instance, by the way. You were talking about the first instance of sound. Mm-hmm. He's jamming on all the buttons to try and unlock it, and he eventually taps something and makes it...
The alarm goes off.
The alarm goes off, and it goes super loud, and
This
basically the symbiote.
This is the first instance.
This is the first instance of sound. So he grabs the nearest thing and he smashes on the glass and he breaks through, and Marie or whatever jumps through, like through the glass basically.
No, he breaks the glass and then
she jumps on him.
attacks him.
And
she was okay before. She was
fine.
just panicking.
She was just
But now
scared.
she wants to kill.
And then the symbiote merges with Eddie.
Dr. Dora Skirth.
Dora Skirth. It is Dora. Merges with Eddie. And we are hyped. We are so excited. We're like, this is it.
What happens is
when it starts.
I think she's strangling him, and then it goes from her hands, and then it moves along his body, and then it slowly fades into it. And I have to say, the merging of the symbiotes is excellent. It's arguably one of the most important things in CGI you'd have to get correct, because it's closest to actual people, which is when CGI is next to a person. That's when you really need to know lighting and stuff like that. Yeah. And it just always, every single one, it was absolutely stellar. So now Venom is in Tom Hardy.
Yeah. Or Eddie Brock.
Yeah, sorry, Eddie Brock. And he is escaping.
Escape scene is done so perfect.
What happens is there are two guards, and immediately he does like Natasha Romanoff style beat 'em ups.
The first instance you see of him using his power, he basically grabs an officer by some sort of part by the shoulders. He lifts up his body and he uses both feet to kick off of the wall beside him, and it cracks the wall. And Angus and I, this is one of the many times in this scene where we look at each other and our jaws are dropped.
It was literally jaw dropping.
And we're like, this is super cool.
And then he slides across the ground with his arm out to trip someone else. He goes downstairs. He just, with the force of his running, he pushes a door and it breaks open.
He breaks doors. He goes through fences. He goes through the forest. He smashes through trees by accident, breaking them.
You would have seen that in, I think, the second trailer. He breaks through the tree, and in the movie, it's so, not emotionally, but it is impactful. It is a powerful push.
Exactly. And moving on from this, we gotta speed up. What he does eventually, Eddie Brock jumps up into a tree super high up, and he's grasping onto the tree for dear life because Eddie Brock mentions before he's afraid of heights, right? So he's afraid of heights. Venom is not. Climbs up
Something
and he's
about
just in shock.
the running. You can see the symbiote directing where the symbiote wants the body to go,
like a marionette.
It throws him around like a marionette, but you just see his body moving, but it's clearly the symbiote.
And that's such an amazing performance from Tom Hardy for that.
Now we go on to, Venom first talking to Eddie, and he says,
"Love it,
Eddie," and then Tom Hardy goes, "Wah!" and he freaks out.
So what he's doing is Eddie Brock is looking in the mirror. And then Venom says Eddie as his eyes and teeth slightly change. They don't change enough. They change for a second. And you can see it, and it's so beautiful. And then he goes...
Tom Hardy voices Venom, and it is...
magnificent.
Great.
It's actually great. And then he falls back into his shower, and he looks, and he's just freaked out, basically.
So now, this is when it cuts back to the other storyline we're following with Riot's symbiote. So... what we see is the woman has exchanged the symbiote with an older woman, and
I talked about
when they link, the older woman used to have like a curl in her back and doesn't anymore, and she can walk perfectly. But this is a big thing about this movie that it does well. In Thor Ragnarok, I'm going to be honest, I don't think I could care less about Hela's storyline.
I don't care about
way more about Thor and Hulk. But this movie does a pretty great job of making me actually care about the other symbiote. Because it's interesting. Alright, so now we go to food.
Okay, so there's a lot of back and forth with Eddie and Venom. But the huge back and forth between Eddie and Venom is, I am hungry.
And the big thing about the symbiote is, the symbiote needs live cells. So, he takes a big bite out of somebody else's steak, and the symbiote says, or no, I think Eddie says, "This is dead," violently, and then eventually he ends up eating lobsters right out of the tank, and that satisfies the symbiote. So yeah, just a little thing. It needs live cells, and that's why the symbiote and Venom ends up eating the heads off of the top of people.
Exactly. And wait, is this does he eat the lobsters after the scene, the huge fight scene, or no? Is that before? I'm pretty sure that's after the fight scene when they all try to invade his apartment. I think that's after. So I'm just gonna.
No, it is. It is
right before.
Not.
Is it before or in the?
It doesn't really make a difference.
Either way, I'm gonna talk about the apartment scene. So basically, there's this whole back and forth between Eddie and Venom, and he's hungry. And there's this amazing symbolism that I see throughout the movie with tater tots, and I don't know what it is.
Oh my gosh, the tater tots!
But
I
think
this so much.
It's so funny. It just gives me a lot of Napoleon Dynamite vibes, and I love it so much.
Give me my tots, dude.
So the scene opens up, and the director talks about the scene because it's actually done amazingly. The scene opens up with Eddie Brock opening up his toaster oven with oven mitts, taking out the tater tots. They burned his hands, and the tater tots are almost charred, and it's such a funny scene. And he takes them out. And then eventually it just moves to Venom saying, "Don't open that door," and it's scary. He's like, "Don't open!" Like it's aggressive, right? And then there's no knocks at the door yet. He just says, "Don't open that door," and then 3 seconds later, somebody knocks.
You could consider that spider sense, but let me just explain quickly. While the symbiote shouldn't have spider sense because it hasn't been bonded with Peter Parker, it's only been bonded with a whole host that can hold Venom, because a quick thing about the symbiotes is that they are like an organ transplant. They need to perfectly match their host, and that's why Isaac was rejected by the symbiote, and why Carlton Drake was accepted.
And so was Eddie Brock.
And then we get this amazing fight scene where not only is Eddie Brock brutally beating these people up, it's kind of spoiled in the trailers, but it's so epic in the movie. He kicks all our butts.
Yeah. So the amazing thing in this movie, in this scene, and the one thing I want to talk about before we move on, is the entire time this fight scene is happening, Eddie Brock is not doing anything with his body, basically. So Venom is moving him around. Venom is shooting stuff out of his arms, not even his hands. He's just shooting tentacles and those things. And the entire time, good old comedic Tom Hardy is just saying, "I'm so sorry," and like, "I'm sorry about your friends," and it's something you can actually truly laugh at, because if you were in that situation, you'd either be terrified or you'd say like, "You know what? I'm sorry. I'm not doing anything. I'm not trying to fight you," and eventually moves to this huge chase scene.
And the back and forth between Venom, and when we say Venom, we're talking about the voice of Venom, Venom as a whole. When there's no more Tom Hardy anymore, it's just the CGI of him. That's when Venom's completely taken over. The back and forth is excellent, and we're just moving into where the symbiote actually takes over his whole body, which you may know from the trailer. The first instance is of the full Venom suit that we see in the comics is when he licks the bald guy, pretty much.
Yeah, and we're kind of gonna skip. Actually, no. I'm just gonna talk about one thing. Basically, Eddie Brock jumps out the window to get away from these people, and then Eddie Brock looks in the reflection of a car and sees Venom's face and body.
Yes.
And he calls him a parasite, and that's a reoccurring thing.
Venom is insulted by this.
By being a parasite, because Venom thinks that he's doing the good in Eddie Brock and making him stronger and that kind of thing. So he's looking in the reflection, and he's like, Eddie Brock is saying to himself, like, "You're not really real, you're just a parasite." And then Venom's reflection moves without Eddie Brock's choice and says, "Parasite," like really aggressively, and tendrils, or whatever you call them.
Yeah, tendrils is
pull him back to the wall, slam him back onto the wall, and they have this big back and forth, and they basically get to know each other.
Just the back and forth with Venom and Eddie Brock is excellent. So now
it moves through this huge. I don't want to talk about it too much. It's just this really well done cinematic scene with Eddie Brock's bike and what Venom can do with that bike, and it looks super cool. Angus and I were looking at each other.
CGI for that and the tendrils, stellar. But although I do have a few gripes about when the whole suit takes over. So at that point, then the whole suit is around the body, and it's okay. The CGI isn't perfect, but
over Venom's body,
it's pretty good. Although this is not the CGI is not done by Industrial Light and Magic, like I would assume. But apparently it's done by a company called One of Us. But I have to say, for it not being a huge expensive movie, it did a pretty great job. So now what happens is he needs to get back into the Life Foundation, or wait, no, not, it wasn't the Life Foundation. It was his work building, because he delivered that note to his boss. He tries to go in, but he has a friend at the door that doesn't let him in, and the symbiote wants to eat him, but Eddie Brock doesn't let him. So then Eddie Brock, he needs to get to the top of the building. So Venom asks him, he's like, you need some height, you need to get all the way up there, and he's like, I can handle that. So then he jumps up, and he just, if you imagine pretty much how Hulk climbs, but a bit faster. That's a big thing about the symbiote. It is fast in its fighting.
It is actually super fast and super, not just physically fast, like I want to run in one direction. It's super mentally fast, and like
yes,
I can make a decision about this right now and do that sort of thing. And that's what I really enjoyed, is that the symbiote doesn't do things because it can. It more just does things because it's the optimal choice in that situation. That's what I love. It's not a brute force like Hulk.
Ooh, and a big thing about the symbiote is its run.
The run
is
is
such
gorilla.
a big creature, right? And immediately what I noticed, it runs like a gorilla.
Yeah.
And it is so, I don't know why, it is so cool.
That's the only way I like Venom to run. I don't like him to run on his feet with like head first. I like
Venom's
the
an
whole
animal.
crawling. The crawling thing.
Venom's an animal, not
exactly.
a human.
And it's not like crawling on the fists like a gorilla. It's more like crawling on the hands, and it looks really cool in fast motion.
It jumps forward and then like grabs and then kind of puts the feet a bit forward. It's great.
Exactly.
Then he did the climb, and the voice in his head, because that's what Venom is in this movie most of the time, is a voice in Eddie Brock's head, and only Eddie Brock can hear it, and he's constantly talking to it, and then everybody thinks he's all weird, and they don't know if they're talking to him or not, which is a reoccurring kind of thing that happens in movies. Mask copy.
Okay, so
My favorite moment in the movie. Malcolm's going to talk about it.
before that happens, so Venom he's reached the top of the building with Eddie Brock and switches back to Eddie Brock, and it's sorry, I know you love this scene.
It's a funny one.
And he like writes up the sign, and it's like do the right thing, and then like a bad word or whatever.
Yep.
And then so Venom says to Eddie Brock, he says jump, because there's a big glass in the window.
Hole in the window.
And then he says no, but Eddie Brock is like, no, I'm not having any of this. And then
See, he doesn't even say no. He just says jump, and Eddie Brock's like,
I'm not doing that. And then he moves to the elevator and he clicks the elevator button, and then
Venom, the voice in his head, says, pussy.
he says pussy. and like it was just such everyone's laughing in the theater, and then it shoots to Eddie Brock going down, and then it opens up to these like 20, 50 SWAT team,
Yep.
point not 1,000, just like 20 red dots on Eddie's chest, and then Angus wants to talk about his favorite movie, favorite scene in the movie.
This is my favorite moment in the whole movie. One of the, it's probably not CIA, it's probably just like Life Foundation people.
Maybe,
And what happens is one of them says, somebody on the radio says mask, and then the person says into the radio copy, and then they all put on their gas masks because they're about to shoot
smoke grenades and flashbangs.
Tear gas probably as well.
Not tear. I think it's just smoke grenades and flashbangs, and that's what one thing before Angus gets to his favorite scene is they are lobbing just flashbangs and smoke grenades, and Venom does not care. Venom grabs the first one and squishes it in his hand, and he like breathes it in. He loves it, and then the second one it like goes into his mouth and he chomps on it. But the flashbangs, he's really not having any of that. That's kind of like hurting him. But other than that, mass copy.
Eddie Brock saying, really, you don't need to do this, and you might have seen the clip online because it was released before the movie. He's like, you really should not do this. And then the person in the radio goes mask. He says copy, and then Eddie Brock, hilariously, he says, all right, have it your own way. And then to Venom, he yells, mask, and then you hear the voice in his head say, copy, as it wraps around. That is another amazing thing in this movie. What happens when the mask goes over is the teeth go from behind his head and under his jaw and wrap around as basically Venom bites his face.
Much like a cowl, how you pull it over your head and roll it, it moves over top and grabs on like it's a cowl.
But yeah,
I love
just that mask copy, and then they start
And
shooting
then
at
he
him.
completely destroys all of them and kind of has some difficulty,
And then
but it's okay.
he has fast fighting, which is great. Another thing that I liked about Thanos, because he's big and he has fast fighting, that's something that really complements a big character, is fast fighting. And then Anne sees all this happen.
And yeah, basically Venom switches back to Eddie, and Eddie walks around the corner kind of half Venom and then moves to full Eddie, and then there's Anne around the corner and she's just awestruck. And then Eddie goes and tries to reassure her and tell her, like, it's alright. And then they move to the hospital to get help. And one of the things Venom says when he's in the car is, first Anne says, yeah, you need to drive with me because Eddie's disagreeing. And then she says, just go in the back. And then Venom,
I like her.
says, I like her. And it's a really funny scene. But they move to the hospital, and there's Anne's new boyfriend or whatever, Eddie Brock.
Just
and they're
something I'd like to mention before
Yep.
that quickly. In the beginning, Anne it just basically divorces Eddie Brock.
Basically,
and apparently they don't go into the divorce, but she gives him his ring back, and they are no longer married. And I'm not completely on her side. I'm thinking, wow, he didn't do a whole lot of bad stuff. Like, you lost your job, and he was foolish, but that's pretty crazy, and you're kind of treating him like absolute garbage when he needs help right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I was kind of feeling like she was a little too hard on him, but this was absolutely how her redeemal, I think, because of how understanding she was when she saw Eddie like killing people, but he's like, this isn't me, because it isn't. He's not trying to kill anybody, but the fact that she is understanding of it, it's great. He mentions in the car that any sound over above 600 hertz hurts for
Exactly.
Venom. And that's another thing, sound weakness. But another interesting thing, Anne says it's his kryptonite, which is
kind of
a
funny.
kind
I
of
like how they do
reoccurring
that.
thing in Sony movies to kind of mention like things about Superman, because in Sam Raimi, in the Sam Raimi movies, Aunt May mentions this to Peter
Shazam.
Parker. Well, yeah, that, but she mentions to Peter Parker, "You're not Superman, you know." And I'm like, eh.
Yeah, they talk a lot about that in Sam Raimi, where like he's trying to shoot the web and saying like Shazam, and that's a DC character, and obviously the one you just mentioned.
Ooh, and then back to what you were saying, she has a new boyfriend, and he's a doctor, and they try to help him. They do an MRI, and Venom completely rejects it. And this was seen in the trailers before, but what I thought was, I was thinking about the first trailer and how we didn't see like any of Venom, and it was really disappointing, to be honest. And that showed the MRI and stuff, and I'm like, this doesn't seem that good. But in the movie, it makes so much sense, and it's just so much better. So, and then the Venom, it leaves his body, and Eddie's like, wait, you traitor, you were killing me. Because that's what the symbiote was doing. It was slowly killing Eddie Brock. And he's talking to the symbiote while it's closed into the MRI area, and like all the walls are closed off. But Venom can't respond because Venom's not in his head. And then the Venom escapes through an air duct, and we don't know where it is. And now we go on to where Riot is.
Does it move right to there? Yeah.
Riot moves on to the little girl, like Malcolm mentioned before, and then connects with Carlton Drake. And at this point, we're wondering, where is Venom? And then Venom connects with a
Chihuahua of some sort.
Yep, a Chihuahua. I thought the symbiote would eat the Chihuahua, but it was interesting. And the Chihuahua was reoccurring because they were in the hospital earlier.
Yeah.
And then at some point, it connects to Anne, and we'll get to that in a little bit. So now, after all of that, Eddie Brock was caught by the people at the Life Foundation.
And he's basically weak.
He doesn't have the symbiote anymore, so he's I wouldn't say he's
But they
weak,
think he has
he's
it.
just as strong as a normal person. And he's telling them, I have no idea where it is. So they bring him out into this forest, and essentially they're going to gun him down, and he's pointing the gun at the person. This is somebody's pointing a gun at Eddie Brock. I keep wanting to say Tom Hardy. Pointing a gun at him, and what he does is he tries to take it off him, but he fails. And that's a big thing that this movie does well, is Eddie Brock is not a superhero. He's not super strong or anything. And I really like that he doesn't kick all their asses, because it would be unrealistic. And then we move on to She-Venom.
Yeah, and here's the thing.
Fan service. I'm
So
telling you.
the dog merged with Anne, and then
The dog didn't merge with Anne. The symbiote
the
did.
symbiote did, yeah, and then Anne eventually comes through. She takes out all the officers, and there's this really weird scene where Venom is basically making out with Eddie Brock, and you're like,
Venom.
"Oh, this is weird." All right, and is slowly merging from Anne
Venom
back to Eddie.
as he's attached to Anne, which just having the scene is huge fan service because, as you may know, Venom is a big person in the comics and people really like that character. And yeah, it was interesting to actually see her in this movie. I did not expect that. So, and then you saw Venom. On my planet, I am a loser.
Okay, so here's the thing.
Explain this. I know it really got close to you.
So Venom was talking to Eddie Brock previously about how he knows a ton about Eddie and that he's not weak, basically, and says that Eddie Brock is a loser.
Yep.
And then
You are a loser.
and then it comes to the shot of them looking at the Life Foundation and is talking about Venom's premise. And this is when I was really sold on the actual point of Venom and what he was trying to.
Because
so
before
first,
it was misty. We didn't know what Venom wanted. We didn't know what the movie
I was
wanted.
kind of on the fence about like what is Venom's goal, and that might have been like a complete showstopper for me. I didn't think I would like it, but then eventually Venom brings up this point about the loser thing again, and he said, "On my planet, I'm a loser."
But here,
we can be something greater, or something like that.
And Venom can be something greater.
Venom can be something greater, and then that's when I'm really sold on why they want to stop the rocket ship. And then I'm just gonna talk about that real quick because we didn't talk about that.
No, that's where we are in the movie.
So what Carlton Drake wants to do is he wants to send another mission to back to this comet because he wants more symbiotes down here, basically because he's merged with
But also, he's merged with Riot, and Riot wants to get back.
Riot
It's also
wants to
a
get
big
back, but also Riot really wants to take over the planet.
And Riot kind of is just like, okay, well, we'll use this, and Riot's goal is to get more symbiotes, bring them back to Earth, and take over the planet and take over the hosts. And because Riot is attached to Carlton Drake says, I want to be on the spaceship. I want to pilot it. And I'm thinking, that's ridiculous. You're a scientist, not an astronaut.
Exactly.
But this is when he gets really, really villainy, and he's still charming.
He's still, and I hate it. It makes me mad.
It makes you hate him more
because it's so good. It's so well done by Riz Ahmed, right?
Yeah, he does a stellar job in this movie.
Okay,
so now we move on to the Riot Venom fight. That's where we are.
Which is and right before that, Riot shows off a bit of his powers because there's this one guy trying to basically abort the mission and stop the ship from going up, and then Riot comes out of Carlton Drake as this giant symbiote and uses one of his tendrils to grab this person's hand and like kind of break it or something like that. Either way, move it off of the button he was about to press, and then does he eat him? I'm pretty sure he eats him.
No, he stabs him. He
stabs him with his spikes, and Venom explains before that Riot is the leader of the group, and Riot has a big arsenal. And I liked how he explained that Riot is the one with an arsenal, and that the symbiotes themselves have arsenals, and they have limits, is the thing. They're not just anything.
One thing I wanted to quickly mention, we didn't talk about the first time we actually saw the Riot symbiote. This was when the Life Foundation first got hold of Eddie Brock, and this was either right before or right after. No, it was right before they took him out to the forest to gun him down.
Yep.
And he's talking to Eddie Brock, and he's like, "Where's Venom?" But it's not like, "Where is the symbiote?" He does the villain thing well because he's charming. He's like, "So where is my symbiote?" And he just absolutely perfect. But what happens is he gets really angry, and Riot completely comes out and starts screaming at him, and you see the saliva come out of his mouth onto Tom Hardy's face. And Riot is so different because he's like Venom but gray and like really rocky and like uglier. Honestly,
it was like Hulk and Abomination. It was just like that. It was like
and uglier,
uglier and like spikier and bonier.
But still,
and stuff.
I say ugly, but that just means he looks kind of like gross, like if you were to touch him.
Exactly.
But he's still so epic, and that's also shown during the fight scene. He is fighting Venom, and he, as Malcolm said, and Venom said in the movie, has a bigger arsenal. He can swing parts of himself like a wrecking ball. He has like huge
spikes and stuff,
arm
and he can make giant
swords.
axes. It's this big, really big deal that Venom says they have a 0% chance of actually getting Riot and killing him.
Because, and that's something I love, and we're getting right into the end of the movie, or the end of the third act per se, near the end of the third act. There's a huge skill gap between Riot and Venom. Riot is clearly stronger, more powerful, and more likely to kill Venom, and Venom is weaker.
Yeah.
And you see that throughout the fight. Riot is winning all the way throughout until they are both disconnected from the people, and Tom Hardy, or
Eddie
Brock
Brock
is fighting Carlton Drake, and just hand to hand, and you see some of Eddie Brock's skill come out until what happens is he jumps off a platform and does a Superman punch from PUBG right into his face.
It was really good.
He falls onto the edge, and Carlton Drake is close to the symbiote, and he's like explaining his plan, and he's like, "Oh, you won't get me," and then he just
halfway through his kind of short monologue, Eddie Brock just kicks him off the edge. But Riot merges with Carlton Drake right before he falls
and stabs.
He jumps up and
Eddie
stabs
Brock.
Eddie.
And
and I want to explain this real quick.
Yeah.
Is that in an earlier scene you see Eddie Brock in the convenience store with one of his friends, the person behind the till, and Eddie Brock is kind of hiding behind some aisles as this person is robbing
the store.
And you kind of see that with Venom, and either Venom's really trying to get to Eddie Brock, but I'm pretty sure what Venom is doing is Venom is kind of hiding. Venom is kind of hiding from Riot because he's scared of something that might happen because he's not merged with Eddie. So Venom eventually kind of crawls up out of the gutter when Riot is gone, merges back with Eddie.
And then Eddie's alive again.
And then he heals all of the stuff. Eddie's alive again, but it's Venom with this giant spike in his chest, and it's the scene where he jumps up and just pulls it out.
And
then
the rocket starts to launch.
Rocket. Yeah.
And he jumps onto the rocket, and I know this podcast seems kind of just like a synopsis of the film, but we're mentioning the plot as we're saying things that are great about the movie.
It's honestly really good.
He jumps onto the rocket, and he says to, basically, it's both Venom and Eddie Brock saying to both Riot and Carlton Drake, have a nice life.
As he slides down the ship,
he cuts open a fuel tank, and the rocket
Does
explodes.
he use Riot's sharp thing or
Yeah,
no?
yeah.
He uses what he took out of his chest to cut open.
Huge symbolism. Riot was the what is it? The cause of his own demise,
basically, yeah.
And what happens is Venom says goodbye, Eddie, or something like that, and the Venom, to protect him, detaches from Eddie Brock and stops the fire, but the fire kills the symbiote. And while most of the movie has focused on sound as the kryptonite of Venom, this is the
fire.
Yeah, this is, while sound has been affecting it, this is what kills the symbiote. Like, it kills it. Basically. And the fire engulfs it, and the symbiote's gone, and
then that's the end of the third act. That's when it goes.
And then this is kind of,
and then
now the epilogue.
Yeah, that's when everything's kind of over.
When Venom died, I actually felt something, which was,
you feel bad for Venom
because when he says I'm kind of a loser, and his back and forth with Eddie Brock, Eddie Brock kind of saying why or why not you shouldn't eat heads off of people. We really get to know Venom's character, and we feel bad for his death. So now we go into. And Venom and Eddie Brock is one. Now
Eddie Brock and Venom are basically like
two different characters.
They're two different characters, but they're also like one character. Is what. So it comes off to Eddie talking to Anne, and it's not super important. It's just Eddie talking to Anne about, and this is some symbolism about his interview. What's the word?
He says he has the interview of a lifetime, which is the Daily Bugle. We're calling it now. I don't know for sure if it will be or if there'll be more movies. But we're saying it's the Daily Bugle.
Either way,
then we realize,
it moves to, and Venom is still alive, and Venom talks back to Eddie, and they establish ground rules, and this is a really good scene. Eddie talks about you can't kill everyone. You have to establish good people and bad people. And then he talks about you can't kill good people, you can only eat bad people. And then
Venom's like, how do we tell? And he says, you can kind of see.
And then he moves into the store where previously the person was robbing it, and the same person comes in to rob the store, because it's got to be like a weekly thing. He comes in to rob the store, and she's terrified, right? But this time, Eddie Brock makes a difference, becomes Venom, and grabs this guy and scares the pants off of him. He grabs him like basically by the shoulders and talks about being a turd in the wind, gonna eat your leg
I will
off.
rip off your arms, and then I will rip off your legs. Then I'll hold your face right off your head, and you will be this armless, legless, faceless thing rolling down the street like a turd in the wind.
And it's a great scene.
We are Venom. At the end, he says, "We are Venom."
He's like, "Who are you?" or "What are you?" And he says, "We are Venom." And then he eats him. And then he looks back and is like, she's like, "Eddie, what's wrong?" And then he's like, "Nothing, Mrs. Chang." And then she's like, I think I got a parasite." And then he goes out of the store, and once again, Venom is discouraged by Eddie calling him a parasite. And he's like,
"Take that back."
And it's like, okay.
Apologize.
I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm sorry. And it's so funny watching that parasite thing. And Eddie walks up the street, and then movie is
over.
That's it. That's the movie.
Now,
end credit scene. You want to talk about end credit scene?
Cletus Cassidy.
Cletus Cassidy.
Carnage, played by Woody Harrelson. Looks like it'll be interesting.
Angus is a little different, but I'm kind of like iffy with Woody Harrelson. I think of Carnage, it would be better played by like the person who played Rorschach in Watchmen. 2009, something like that. He's like kind of a bit of a thin guy, but he's still got like that strong.
It's the red hair,
that strong face, the red hair, and like he looks kind of scary and looks more murdery. Woody Harrelson looks a bit too comical, I guess. But they got the good red curly hair, and they talked about him being like, they called him Red, and they at the very end
he said there will be carnage, which was a bit too on the nose for me, but that's okay. So
either way, that's the movie, and at the very end there's a little bit of Into the Spider-Verse, which I'm super hyped about.
There's an entire scene of Into the Spider-Verse, and it looks so
scene.
great.
And that's Venom. Any other points you want to mention?
I wanted to talk just a bit more about general thoughts. I was hearing before I was watching something about a trailer. I think it was the second trailer, and they were saying the tendrils of Venom were very webbish. But what I have to say to that, and they're like, "Oh, well, he hasn't connected with Spider-Man, so what the heck?" But what I have to say to that is they're not really like webs, but they're more like
tentacles.
Slime, and that's exactly what the symbiote is. It's just what it is. There's this one scene in it where the tendril goes out and it's kind of like a web and it attaches to a bar and he swings into a window, and it's just so well done. CGI overall pretty dang good.
So there's a lot of the oddly satisfying people who do the slime videos that are like, this is such a good movie.
There were, I think the first trailer was a disappointment. The second trailer was interesting. But the movie is better than both of those.
The movie is better than the trailers for sure. Either way, that's all of Venom. And one more point.
So, yeah, I'm just going off of what you're saying. That's all the movie, and I have to say, it was a good movie. This was I would even go as far to say this was a great movie. At least it was it was entertaining. It was funny. People were saying before to me, because we didn't see it right when it came out. We saw it today, which is
like a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks later.
It's October 13th. We saw it, and people mentioned it's like a buddy cop movie between Venom and Eddie Brock, and it totally is. And everybody, I heard a lot of people say, "Oh no, I wish it was R." But I think no matter what, whatever you could say, whatever caused it, but whatever they did, it worked for this movie.
It worked really
good. And so plot, it was good. I understood everything going along. Pacing was pretty good overall, but during the late second act and the third act, it was a little fast. Like the fight scene with Riot was a little fast.
And also kind of Riot's, kind of the whole rocket ship launch was kind of rushed. Basically, Carlton Drake's and Riot's purpose was a little bit kind of like assume a little bit of this and assume a little bit of that. Either way, if they did anything different, most likely they would have ended up messing up the movie to substantially.
Mm-hmm. So yeah. yeah, that's pretty much
that
all of
everything?
my thoughts.
That's all my thoughts as well.
I said my favorite scene, which was mask copy. What was your favorite part of the movie?
My favorite part of the movie was when it was brought together by Venom calling himself a loser on his own.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't really sold on the whole Venom purpose until that very moment. Otherwise, tons of funny parts. I love Tom Hardy as Eddie Brock. I don't know what it is.
I kept hearing that everybody was
does
saying
an amazing job.
Tom Hardy was perfect, and he totally was.
Does a way better Venom than he does Bane, for sure.
Mm-hmm. I wouldn't go to say that. I thought Bane was pretty good.
I thought Bane was pretty good as well.
so
It just does a really good Eddie Brock.
Now, yeah, that's pretty much all. So just to review what we've done, we did kind of a synopsis of most of the movie, at least the most important points. We mentioned things that were great, some things that were bad. Overall, yeah, so it goes through Venom's journey, and he is overall victorious, and it's just a good movie.
We talked about our final points at the end, and yeah, I don't know how should we end this.
What do you rate it? Out of 10.
I meant to talk about. So at the beginning, went into it, and Angus and I talked. Angus said 7 out of 10 based on the trailers and stuff we've seen, and I said 7.5 out of 10. And I walk out of this movie, and I 8 out of 10.
Why?
I said 8.2 out of 10. And the other stuff is also because of the fast pacing stuff. That's kind of why I marked it a little low, and also because it's not a like. Whoa! I walk out of that. My eyes and my
there were jaw dropping moments.
There were jaw dropping moments, but the movie overall isn't like Dark Knight amazing, right? So that's what I rate it. What about you?
I'm pretty picky for superhero movies because I expect a lot because I'm a fan and I think that it's really important that they get these characters right. Also, you said this movie got. You said earlier, before we started, this movie got Venom right.
It got it. That's because we've watched so much Spider-Man on
Content,
TV as kids. As kids, we've seen so many Spider-Man shows, and we've come to know this character as the Venom he is. And this movie does Venom so beautifully without the contrast of Spider-Man. And that's one thing I forgot to mention. Which is something I really wanted to talk about, and I talked about a ton. And I'm sorry, this is one more point before Angus's rating. But contrast. This movie does contrast amazingly well. At the beginning opening shot, it's super gritty and dark, and then it moves to beautiful, bright New York. And there's just so much contrast in the movie, and you have to see it to understand. But once you understand this contrast, it's beautiful.
So I like I said, I'm picky. I have to say it's a 7.5.
7.5?
I came in with pretty high expectations, and it met pretty much all of them.
And a little bit more than
just a little bit more, yeah.
Which is exactly what you want from a
I totally agree with every one of Malcolm's points. It wasn't a perfect movie. It wasn't wow. It was wow, but not all the way through. There were problems. But overall, it's a great movie. 7 out of 10.
All right.
So yeah, that was Venom, and that was
Angus and Mac talk Venom.
And yeah, that's all. So
we hope to see you in the next
amount of time to be determined.
We hope to see you in the next time a big popular nerd movie comes out.
Yeah. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.